and welcome to Love Oz YA. My name is Julia, and today I'm here with Tobias Madden to chat about his exciting new book, Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell. Tobias, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always such a pleasure to chat with the Love Oz YA gang.
And we love to have you. So to kick us off, for those who haven't read it yet, what is the book about?
So Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell is about a 17-year-old gamer who decides to go undercover in a local production of Chicago the Musical, where his mother is playing the lead role, in order to win the heart of his secret online crush.
So the book is about both video games and musical theatre. Why did you choose to write about both of those things in the one book?
So I started writing this book towards the end of 2020, just after I had sold Anything But Fine to Penguin. And obviously the world was a pretty interesting / depressing place at the time. And so I really wanted to write about things that would just bring me joy during the writing experience. Because it is long and it can be difficult sometimes, especially given the circumstances of going, in and out of lockdown and all of that. So I was like, what brought me joy when I was a teenager? What, were the kind of main things that I was interested in, that I loved? Obviously, one of them was theatre. So that was kind of a given. And then I was like, but I really loved gaming. Like, I loved that world. I spent hours and hours every week playing games with my older brother. And so I was like, maybe I can combine them into a book somehow, and then obviously had to find a plot that would allow me to use both of those things, because they don't necessarily seem like they go hand in hand, which is how we ended up with the kind of harebrained scheme, I guess, that Noah has to meet his crush in this musical.
So I feel like Noah goes on a really big journey throughout the book. He learns a lot about himself and about the other people in his life. So how did you approach writing Noah's big emotional arc?
Gosh, I mean, I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, like, I'm a big planner, so like the plot was all sort of laid out before me before I started writing, and I knew what all of those main beats were. But I think, the core plot, of the romance was one thing, but then, I really like my side characters to have their own kind of fleshed out kind of journeys, and for them to be pretty three-dimensional as well. So then once I added in, a couple of those side characters, mainly Noah's mum, Rose, once I found her character, I knew that, that needed its own sort of pretty big and reasonably emotional arc, because she is kind of self-obsessed and not the easiest parent for Noah in particular. They don't have the easiest relationship because they just are very different people, and they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. They don't share a single interest. So yeah, navigating that relationship was probably the most challenging part. The romance comes quite naturally and is quite easy. But that mother-son relationship was really interesting to write. And I just wanted to make sure that, while Rose is incredibly frustrating at times, that people could also sort of see, the reason why she is like that, and to not, just treat her as the villain, but to also sort of see her side of the story from time to time.
Yeah, that's definitely how I saw it. I felt like, she had those two sides to her where you see her through Noah's eyes in that she's a bit of, a villain or a deterrent in his story sometimes. But then, you get to know her better and see things from her point of view and understand what's going on in her life separate from Noah. So the book also has these little scenes throughout the story where Noah is playing games online with his crush. What do you feel like these add to the book?
I mean, I think they're a really nice kind of touchstone throughout the book for any people who are interested in gaming. If they're sort of less familiar with the theatre world, it's nice to sort of check back in that kind of online gaming world. And I think, a lot of people who aren't gamers, when they hear that there's a fair bit of gaming in it, get a little bit concerned that they're not going to understand what's going on. But I think, the thing with most of the scenes that take place within the game, they're actually conversations. Like there's not
Yeah.
really that much of the actual kind of, slashing and killing dragons and stuff like that. It's more just their moments for the two online personas of the two boys to communicate and to have those kind of moments together. And so we can see their kind of friendship for what it is and what it was before Noah decided to sort of go on his own little quest in the real world. And yeah, so I hope those scenes are kind of just cute and funny. And we also, I think plot wise, they're kind of integral because they're the moments that Noah learns a lot about Eli, and that he then uses in the real world to sort of, to aid his quest in getting Eli to fall for him. So they're quite important. And one thing I like about those scenes is that, they kind of subtly, or sometimes not as subtly, mirror what's going on in the real world, which is something that I kind of consciously constructed that way, so that they would feel more a part of the kind of broader narrative as well, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I know that you're a really big musical theatre fan. You've performed in so many incredible shows across Australia. Did you find it challenging to write a protagonist who isn't necessarily the biggest fan of musical theatre?
It was actually probably the most fun part about the whole thing. I think, like, because the theatre world is so unique, and is just full of all these kind of very funny things and all these idiosyncrasies and all of this kind of slang and customs and traditions and superstitions and stuff that has been brought along in the theatre world for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so I think dropping an outsider into that scenario was so much fun, to sort of, explore all of those kind of funny little things through Noah's eyes, whether it's, stuff that happens in the rehearsal room or going to see shows. But also it was really nice for me to sort of, gradually show him how beautiful that community can be, and how supportive and how wonderful. And, a lot of queer people, no matter where they're from, do find their community in that kind of theatre world or the arts world in general. And so I think, it's a really important thing for Noah as a character to see, that this person, because Noah is such an outsider in the real world in every way, and he's such a loner, and he really hides himself away kind of in that online world. So I think it was a really beautiful thing to be able to show him that side of the theatre world, that it can be really lovely and supportive. And but also, mainly just to look at all of the silly things. And like, there's a scene where the boys go and see Cats in Melbourne, and that was one of my favorite scenes to write because Cats is my favorite musical. But I know that a lot of people find Cats very difficult to get on board with, and so it was really fun to kind of play up those moments. And it was just a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, that's so cool. So like you mentioned, this is your second novel after Anything But Fine. Did you find it different or similar to write your second book as opposed to your first?
I mean, I think there are a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences. The kind of second book tends to be quite stressful, I think, for a lot of people, and sometimes quite difficult. I definitely felt the pressure when writing Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell. As I said, like I was writing it sort of just after Anything But Fine had sold to Penguin. So it's not like it had been read by, hundreds of people or anything yet. But I think even knowing that, Anything But Fine was going to be published, and that people would read it, put kind of a weird pressure on the second book, because it's like, you don't want it to be too similar. So you can't have like similar characters, too many of the similar tropes, that sort of thing. But you also don't want it to be too different, because then people who enjoyed the first book won't enjoy the second one, which is kind of silly. So that was kind of my main stress, was just making sure that the book, stood on its own, but also was something that, my future readers would also enjoy. So that was definitely a bit of a stress. Aside from that, I mean, I found the process quite enjoyable, like I did the first time. I think, my decision to just write about things that I really liked paid off, because it was always just really fun to return to the book. to the draft and just sit down and yeah, kind of live in that world with those characters. I think, for me, that's probably something I'll always do when I write, is just write about stuff that I really like. Because, when I wrote both of my first books, I was working full time. And so, I was always writing on my lunch breaks and late at night and kind of all weekend. So if you don't enjoy the subject matter, I think it would be a really kind of difficult experience. And I hope that, by writing about things that I love so much and that I connect with, that it makes it easier for readers to connect with the books as well. But yeah, I mean, I think overall the experience was reasonably similar. I approached them kind of similarly in terms of plotting and stuff like that, plotting and planning and all of that. Noah Mitchell was a lot more complicated to plot, because there's, I guess there's kind of a whole bunch more subplots than there were in Anything But Fine, and also a much larger cast of characters. So my spreadsheet for my plotting, was a lot bigger and a lot more in depth. But I really love that part of the process. I love kind of figuring out where the story will go and how all the characters' arcs kind of intersect and when they intersect and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I love that part of the process. So I'm glad that I kind of, yeah, approached it the same way. And you learn more with each book about what works and what doesn't work for you, which I think is really good. But then also they feel very different. So some things that work for the first one may not work for the second one. So it's a very interesting kind of ever-changing journey.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. So finally, do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Yeah, I mean, probably a few things, but I mean, that would be like a whole kind of podcast on its own, I guess. But I think one thing is just to read really, really widely. Like, it can be really tempting when you're an aspiring YA author to just read YA books, which is also really important because it's really great to read, everything that's out there, and see what kind of YA you like, what types of characters' voices you like, that sort of thing. What you connect with as a reader can be really important to help you figure out, your own voice as a writer. But I do think that if you can read, yeah, really widely, it's so helpful because, reading middle grade books and, literary fiction and the odd kind of nonfiction or, fantasy, sci-fi, just everything, the more you can absorb, the more you have to draw upon as a writer. And it can be really surprising sometimes, reading outside your usual genre, how much it can inspire you to write within your kind of normal genre. I think, like, even, watching TV shows and stuff, like sometimes, like, I obviously don't write sci-fi, but sometimes when I watch like a really great sci-fi movie, I feel that it just kind of gets the cogs in my brain working, so in a very different way to what they would if I was sitting down to plot a contemporary book. But I just feel like it can be really helpful. So yeah, I think read as widely as you can, and it just, yeah, really helps you find your own voice as a writer, because no one said that, YA books have to all sound the same. Some of them are much more literary, some of them do feel younger, so I think it's just really great to consume everything you can. Good books will always make you a better writer, no matter what kind of area they're from. And I think my other main piece of advice that I often give is just to finish whatever you're working on, whether it's a short story or a full-length manuscript. You will learn so much more from finishing one project than starting 30 different projects, because the process changes so much, especially if it's something novel length. To get that first 10,000 words done and to have the plotting done and stuff is one huge part of it. But then to push past that and push past the 50,000 word mark and to keep going and to sustain that and to, keep your characters going through the whole book and keep the voice, consistent and stuff like that. It's a huge, huge learning experience. And even if you finish the manuscript, then, tidy it up as much as you can and send it to some readers and, query some literary agents, get as much feedback as you can. And, you might be really lucky and land an agent, or you might get rejected, 50 something times like I did with my very first manuscript. But you just learn so much from that. And so I think, yeah, just finish it, whatever it is, finish it, and you'll be very happy in hindsight, I would say.
Awesome. Those are some really great tips that I'm sure people will appreciate. Thank you so much for talking to me. Take About Noah Mitchell is out everywhere, so I hope everyone goes and reads it and enjoys it like I did. Thank you, Tobias.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun to chat.